Hey, welcome back. So this is the second last week. So this week we kind of changed gears a bit. We're just going to talk about issues of justice in healthcare, and we kind of continue this next week. Next week is the last week. So it's kind of shifting gears in a way. Other times we're talking largely about kind of particular, specific, individual situations and considering the moral issues and so on. But all of this does go on in the real world anyways, within kind of, framework systems of healthcare delivery where, other considerations, very kind of concrete ones basically about, the allocation of scarce resources, issues of cost, issues of effectiveness, and so on, all need to be taken into account as well. So it's partly in those terms that we step back and think about larger issues of justice, but we're going to focus here on probably the single most important issue that comes up in this way, and that has to do with whether or not there is a right to health care, basically, and just what that might mean. Now, what it always does mean, at least almost always when people are talking about such a right, is meant in a positive sense. We had this distinction a few weeks ago between positive and negative rights, but just to repeat, the idea of a positive right, at least in this case, it just means, you actually get something. Basically, you have a right to actual health care. That just means there's an obligation on others, or just kind of on society in general, to provide certain things. Right? The idea of a negative right just means, you are permitted to do something. It doesn't mean that it's supplied to you or that anyone else has to do anything other than not get in your way. So when we talk about a right to health care, it almost always means a right in a positive sense where you have, a kind of entitlement to at least some level of health care. So anyway, there's a few things this week. Basically, there's the Vaughan text, basically. You can look at that. A lot of that, as I note, I think, on Blackboard, is dealing with sort of situations in the context of the American healthcare situation. That's sort of fine. We kind of come back to that. As far as the actual material dealing with different theories of justice, it's a little bit brief. That's okay, I guess. We're going to focus on sort of the two main points of view that tend to shape discussion in this country. That's going to be a kind of liberal egalitarian view, or because it derives from the work of John Rawls, we can call that a Rawlsian view, and a more libertarian view, basically. Those will have to do with the two readings that we look at after. You might want to just go back. You may remember very early, basically, in one of the chapters, I think it's chapter 2, there's a couple of pages on Rawls. You might want to just go back and have a look at that again. We didn't really focus on it then, knowing, well, it wasn't going to be until now that we talked about it, but you might want to just go back and check that out as well. It's kind of a supplement to what Vaughan says in this chapter. But anyway, have a look at that, and then the other two readings, I can probably summarize them fairly quickly, I guess, at Daniels and Engelhardt. They're two contrasting views, basically. Daniels is giving basically a Rawlsian view, so I call that liberal egalitarian, basically. It tries to balance or find a way to reconcile two different perspectives. One is a commitment to egalitarianism, and it is understood very much along Kantian lines. There's kind of an intrinsic moral equality, and we want to somehow recognize that in some sort of institutional way, so he thinks there's this basic principle of equal equality, which is going to basically mean a sort of an equal right to health care, at least of a basic kind. He's going to connect that to the equality of opportunity, which is to say to justify it on the basis of equality of opportunity as an essential precondition, right, for there to be, in a meaningful sense, equality of opportunity. He thinks, well, that would just be undermined if people did not have equal access to at least that level of health care that would, support the idea of equality of opportunity. Now, the point with Rawls is, and then Daniel does this, is say, well, over and above that, it's possible that you can have inequalities that are justified, right? So, we have that basic equality enshrined and guaranteed, and that's all fine. But it's possible that over and above that, and in particular in terms of healthcare, there could be higher tiers, so to speak, right? So there's higher levels of whatever better or more discretionary or optional forms of medical treatment and so on. The point about a Rawlsian perspective, and this is what Daniels wants to emphasize, although I think he could be a little sharper about it, is just to say there is a condition on the moral permissibility of any such inequality. Any such inequality, right, to be allowed has to be such that it does not, at the very least, does not make those less advantaged worse off, right? Basically, it's supposed to kind of be good for everybody. It's very good for those who can take advantage of it, of course, those who have the means and so on to take advantage of it, of course. That's, they're the ones getting the benefits directly. But it can't come at the expense of those less well off. That's the condition in the Rawlsian view, basically. And so you have to take that very seriously. That is a condition, right? If that condition is not fulfilled, then any such inequalities, any such higher tiers of healthcare would not be allowed. Right? Now, Daniels thinks, we can probably figure out a way to make this work. Arguably, that's what goes on in this country and in other countries as well, although it is arguable. And that's partly why it may be relevant to consider some of the things that Vaughan is talking about when he's discussing, problematic features of the contemporary American healthcare situation. The basic kind of question is it justified? Is there something wrong from a Rawlsian point of view? Is it the case that some of those higher tiers or other kinds of optional levels of healthcare and so on that do exist, are they causing problems in ways that basically undermines what's supposed to be the single most important thing, the thing that actually gets priority, and that is guaranteeing that basic tier on an equal basis for everybody. Whether or not that is somehow compromised or weakened. It's a big question, but anyway, that would be the issue to consider. But anyway, the point then for Daniels or that kind of perspective is that you can have multi-tier system like that, but only subject to that condition that it does not somehow undermine the basic tier, which is the entitlement of everybody equally. So the other piece from Engelhardt, of course, takes a more libertarian view, and that's just kind of a more, kind of straightforward, somewhat simplistic view, which simply sort of prioritizes the right of private property and basically says, look, well, technically nobody owes anybody anything else, unless, of course, you're directly at fault for injuring or causing someone to be sick or whatever. Then you ought to pay, but otherwise there's something morally unjustifiable about basically making people pay, right? So seeing taxation as a coercive measure of taking people's property and basically redistributing it in the form of a public health care system. Anyway, that's kind of Engelhardt's basic view, that there's something just generally wrong with that. So in particular with regard to healthcare, that in general, right, there is no positive right to health care along those lines. There should not be a publicly funded basic tier at all. Health care should just be like any other kind of thing that people can buy if they want to and so on, kind of in a marketplace-based kind of system. So, hang on. He doesn't think it's bad, of course, to help people or to, sort of voluntarily, say, make donations to hospitals or something like that, whatever. But, the key thing for him is it's always voluntary, right? He always wants people to be, choosing consciously where their resources go, and technically and strictly being under no moral obligation whatsoever to, contribute to like a public health care system. Now, he does seem to think, in such as things are in the real world, that there is such a thing and there probably always will be. So he might just be more concerned with, always kind of raising these objections, always kind of causing trouble for it, trying to keep it from expanding too much, and always having the emphasis on the, kind of more market or oriented tiers of health care, whereas, Daniels kind of the emphasis and the priorities go the other way. So you can just think about this. I mean, the thing to consider basically is just, which of these perspectives might be more compelling, because they are going to have consequences basically, I think, in terms of the scope, right? What services would actually be included in that basic tier. Nobody thinks it's unlimited. Nobody thinks that, although you might think that a more kind of out and out, fully egalitarian system is more morally justifiable. It's good to have that option on the table. Basically, Daniels comes up the middle. You know, you can have on the one side a more complete egalitarian view, or on the other side something of what Engelhardt is talking about along libertarian lines. You know, you might think that a more fully egalitarian system, right, it can still be kept under control. People are always worried about the concrete, issues of cost and so on, but that's certainly a possibility. But of the other two, these are kind of more the live options that we have in this country, in these times, basically. Basically, should there be more emphasis on making sure there is, a strong and robust kind of basic tier to which everybody has, as a matter of moral right, an entitlement to, and then possibly over and above that other tiers that other people can access if they can and choose to. Or basically really trying to diminish that kind of basic tier idea, minimize that, and put the emphasis elsewhere. Basically then thinking, you can look at what Vaughan says in the part of his chapter. If you want to, you can look at the other reading I didn't assign, the one that's called something like Mirror, Mirror. Basically there's also some data, some information that could be useful when you're trying to think about this question as to whether the status quo in American healthcare delivery really does or does not measure up according to, say, the Rawlsian principle or not. Basically, whether it's the case that the way things are, could be quite wasteful, could be causing problems that basically limit or undermine what that kind of basic tier is supposed to be, if you think it's supposed to be there at all. So that's basically things to be thinking about for now, thinking about that for discussion, and then next week we're going to relate it to some of the current things going on related to the pandemic, just to, we got to have it somewhere. Although I'm going to try to have that material up earlier than next week so you can just get going on it and we can sort of get through to the end, well, I guess more quickly, and you'll probably have other things you need to take care of as well. So I'm going to wrap this up here. There's going to be discussion. There's going to be quiz, which will be the last quiz too. I guess I was supposed to mention that. Basically, there's going to be a few more things basically next week, and then otherwise I think there's just a final exam. All right, more information on that to follow.